Thank you for joining IAB There.
Thank you for joining IAB There. Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Behrens, Editor-in-Chief here at the Interactive Advertising Bureau. IAB There is our regular streaming show where we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's show is the third in an intermittent series about the intersection of brands and values. The inspiration for this series came from Connie Brahms, the Chief Digital and Marketing Officer for Unilever, at our annual leadership event, when she talked about how brands both need to be a good value economically and also have values to stand for something. Subsequently, I interviewed Richard Kestenbaum of Triangle Capital, that was back in April, about the value of brand values. Just last week, I interviewed Sarah Frank of Now This and Jamie Miller of Cheerios about how publishers and brands can work on purpose together. Today, I'm pleased to welcome two guests. Lana McGilvray, she is the founder and CEO of Purpose Worldwide, which is a marketing and a strategy and public relations firm, and also Shannon LaPierre, who's the VP of Communications for Stanley, Black & Decker. What is our purpose today for this conversation? It is to discuss a new brand metric, which is what is a return on purpose? We talk about return on investment, we talk about return on advertising spend, but what is a return on purpose and how do brands take that seriously? I should disclose at the outset that I am a proud member of the Purpose Worldwide Advisory Board. Lana is a longtime friend. Let's bring Lana into the stream. Lana McGilvray, welcome to IAB There.
Thank you, Brad. I'm so glad to be here.
So you and I first met, it was like 2008. At that time, you were the head of marketing for Daytran Media. And then we knew each other and worked together during about a decade at Blast PR. But about 2 years ago, a little less, you founded Purpose Worldwide. So why is purpose the organizing idea for your company? What, in other words, is the purpose of purpose?
Thanks, Brad. It's really something that's been an evolution in my career. So I know that we did meet back at Daytran Media, but I think had about a 23-year career in advertising and media, public relations, working with some of the technology companies. And that's actually my original affiliation with IAB. But I found myself spending more and more of my time doing purpose-driven initiatives inside and outside of work. So even within the industry that we've been in for so long, I was working on things like women advancing at IAB. I was involved in some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives well before it became kind of something that was trending. And so about 2 years ago, as you know, I came together with two peers that are my co-founders. They happen to be women. And we decided that we were going to invest our time into providing integrated services to help connect organizations' purpose to their growth. And so really to help them crystallize what their purpose is and then help drive the growth. And the reason we do that is our purpose is really, we think that purpose-driven companies do have higher value. We have a lot of metrics to support that. And we want them to be the organizations that are driving the future for everyone.
So, you and I and the team, we've been talking about this sort of idea of a new metric, return on purpose, for a while. So just what does it mean? How do you think about ROP as the new ROI?
I think about it in many ways, and people like Shannon, who everybody will hear from soon, are really inspiring some of those thoughts. But for me, I've looked at some of the primary research. There's been some great research actually put together by Accenture and quite a few other firms where we can actually see how the various brands are actually measuring their return on purpose. Some of the ways that they're measuring return on purpose are really hard. They're really easy to associate with fiscal measures of it, how they're doing on the stock market. And some are a little bit softer in terms of brand equity and value. People are attaching loyalty metrics to it. And then something that I think Shannon will probably speak to, and others that I've spoken to, including Lisa Campbell, who's really the fabulous CMO over at Autodesk, is really around talent acquisition, retention, and loyalty to the companies. And then finally, social impact. So we can see, especially with members of the Business Roundtable, who I think, if you're not familiar with it, the Business Roundtable for listeners is a group of CEOs of the top performing companies in the US, and about 183 of them committed. They signed a purpose pledge back in 2019. And so when you think of that, and you think of metrics that scale and some of the commitments to reducing carbon footprint and to providing money to charities, that's one of the big metrics too, because you can have one company's contribution to return on purpose, and then when you multiply it across an industry, it becomes that much greater.
So we have, just to go kind of adjacent for a moment, we've got really solid research that says that companies that have, very diverse employee bases, very diverse C-suites, tend to over-index positively on things like innovation and profitability. Do you feel like there's a similar over-indexing with purpose-driven companies? And do you have any evidence?
Well, I have clear feedback and data, especially from people that are investing in companies that are purpose-driven. And then I have data from individual companies. I will say that I don't think that we have an index where we could see if you're investing this much in purpose, you can expect this much return. I don't think we have it down to a science. We don't have the kind of literature that we have maybe on diversity, equity, and inclusion or other subjects. But as you know, I think you introduced me to Richard Kestenbaum. We now have entire investment firms in retail spaces or in various sectors where they're purposely investing in purpose-driven companies because they are performing better for them. So it's one of the things they're looking for when they go to make their investments.
So we're going to bring Shannon LaPierre into the stream shortly and talk about Stanley Black & Decker as a purpose-driven company. But what other companies, either inside your company, Purpose Worldwide, we're saying purpose so many times that I think my lips are going to start tripping over it. But with what companies, you mentioned Autodesk, and we're going to talk about Stanley Black & Decker. What other companies either, and please let us know inside the Purpose Worldwide portfolio or out, but who's doing it right? Who's really hitting this particular mark?
Yeah. Oh, well, right or wrong, I think is a measure. Some people can have an opinion on that, and everybody's entitled to that. But really, companies of all sizes, which is really so exciting for me, and not just we have B Corps now and NGOs, we have businesses. Everybody's getting on the purpose bandwagon, and so within the portfolio, we have a small telco that just happens to be the best scoring mobile service provider, Reach Mobile, on every single measure by Trustpilot. But they're also providing 10% of their data profits back to women and children that do not have access to communication because they think it's a human right. So that's an example of a small emerging company with purpose. Larger ones that we all know, Patagonia, Tom's, Stanley Black & Decker, IKEA, they have fantastic case studies. And if you'd like to look at purpose statements that tie to metrics that they can stand behind, they're really great examples. And then I bumped into Shannon because I was researching Autodesk and Stanley Black & Decker, and we had a common, one of my clients was working with Shannon. She's not a client. And I thought some of the OGs were really like Patagonia and Tom's, and as Shannon will probably share, they go back to like 1843 or something. I'm not exactly sure of the origin year, but they've been a purpose-driven company for a very long time now.
So let's go the other side, which is, as we've seen in this series, as we've just seen in the last few minutes, more and more companies are committing to purpose, but there are ways to screw this up. What are they? What are the pitfalls to avoid? And then we'll rope Shannon into the conversation.
I just spoke with Rashad Bakwala and Lisa Campbell about this just a little while ago. And I think one of the things is I listen that purpose-driven brands or those attempting to really fulfill their purpose is it needs to be authentic. And so when you move away from anything that's authentic to you and you try to, you'll get accused of purpose washing in a second. And it's not only externally, you're not only going to end up on the boycott list and, in poor media stories or things like that, but it's also a bummer for the staff and the morale because you're never going to be able to live up to a purpose that they can embrace. And so one of the other measures that we're seeing come out of talent is innovation. And I would say that one of the best times, even though it was one of the worst times for all of us, was the pandemic. We saw a lot of companies be able to take their purpose and turn it into giving or projects in which their employees got together and gave back to their local communities. So I think it just goes far beyond profit when you look at that multi-stakeholder model.
Well, and I think that, one of the questions in business is always sort of having not only a North Star, but also a rudder to steer with. And it sounds like Purpose is affording organizations both of those things. But let's bring Shannon LaPierre into the stream and dig in on Stanley Black & Decker and how what she's doing there, reflects and amplifies what we're talking about right now. Shannon LaPierre, welcome to
Hello.
IAB There.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is great. Very excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you start, if you could tell us a little bit about your role at Black & Decker, Stanley Black & Decker, and also how you came to Stanley Black & Decker. What were you doing before?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Communications Officer at Stanley Black & Decker. I have a great role at the world's largest tool company, but people may not know that we're also a leader in engineered fastening. So tiny composite and materials that hold all the things together around you. Some cars have about 5,000 in them, and also the world's second largest electronic security company. So I have the great pleasure of leading a fabulously talented, integrated marketing and communications team, and uniquely combines in our corporate marketing, including all our web and social capabilities, with our corporate brand, with corporate sponsorship, along with the traditional internal and external communications, philanthropy, and also government relations. And so we bring all of these components together in our organization, working closely with partners and investor relations and in our CSR team to really bring our purpose and our corporate brand and message to life for the company. I've always been in the corporate communications and media relations, crisis communications field and sector, and really always believed that companies had the ability to make profit as well as be good companies, and do that by taking care of their employees, their customers, and their communities. And it's just been a great time to be working on this work, where so many companies and organizations are finally recognizing the value of stakeholder capitalism and what it means to really be a good organization and a good company and a good citizen.
And how did you come to arrive at Stanley Black & Decker?
It was a fairly unique situation. I left my previous job as head of communications at the Hartford, with looking for a change of pace. And I actually took a year and a half off and went back to school and got my master's degree at the ripe age of late 40-ish something. And I, really wanting to get back into the research and the science that backs a lot of the communications work that I had done for decades. And as I was finishing that program up, I got a call from a former colleague who said, "I have a great job for you." So I went to interview at Stanley Black & Decker and had not thought about that as an option, and was just amazed at the company, the performance, the brands of the organization. So they own some of the world's greatest brands like DeWalt and Black & Decker and Stanley. We eventually bought Craftsman, and the opportunity to really tell that story of the organization. We were founded in 1843 by Frederick Stanley, who was a social entrepreneur of his time. So what people may not realize is New Britain, Connecticut, where we were founded, was a hotbed of industry back in the first and second industrial revolutions. So they were manufacturing, was a big hub in Connecticut at that time. And Frederick Stanley, not only ran his business and his company there, but he was also the first mayor of New Britain. He brought gas lighting to the city. And during the Great Depression, when other companies were laying employees off, he put those employees to work, making some of the first Lego type toys for kids. So these metal, almost erector set types of toys to really keep people employed and working during that time period. And so I joined the company The CEO was recently promoted, had been with the company almost 20 years as CFO and COO, and really wanted to do something extra special with this company and this organization to help ensure that the organization could thrive for another 175 years. When you work for a company that has that history and legacy of an organization that's been around a long time, you do realize that that we, and I think we feel as our management team at Stanley Black & Decker, that we're really just stewards of that company for a period of time. That company was around a long time before us, and we want to make sure it's around for a long time after we leave too.
Most corporations last about a century, sort of the way, better part of a century, the way a lot of people last. And so it's remarkable, the longevity that you're talking about with Stanley Black & Decker. So before we talk about what the return on purpose for the organization might be, let's talk about what that purpose is and who that purpose serves. And I'm looking over your right shoulder, and I have a sneaking suspicion that might have something to do with it. So what is the purpose of Superstore? What is the organized? Go ahead.
That is our purpose for those who make the world. So we did extensive research. Was my first project when I started at the company was to work on our purpose. So our CEO had been working on his strategic plan for the corporation, and it was really around continuing our commitment to strong financial performance, wanting to be known as one of the world's leading innovators, recognizing that innovation is so important for performance and growth, but also elevating our commitment to social responsibility as a key tenet of the organization going forward. And as we just talked about, that really goes back to the roots of who we were as a company. So we did a lot of research around understanding from our employees all around the organization, from outside experts and luminaries in fields like philosophy and anthropology around this idea of making and creating, right? When you think about Stanley Black & Decker, manufacturers, we are making and creating products that other people use to make and create the world around us. And so this work was really, really very thoughtful and meaningful for a lot of our employees, and it reflected their voice and what they were so proud of. When you're making a tool off a product line, right, that your friends and your neighbors are going to be using out in the world to build that world, it's really meaningful. And there was a wonderful quote that we used, I believe it was Winston Churchill in the process of coming up with this purpose, which is really that, we make our buildings, therefore they make us, right? And really the idea being that you're a product of the environment in which you live, and the passion that people have around making and creating. And so we really wanted to be able to bring that to life for our employees and then also our customers. So when we talk about for those are for our customers, which are the people out there day after day. And never before the pandemic did I think we all fully appreciate the role of the essential worker in our communities and in our society, the people who are going out and doing the hard work every day to build, protect, and create the world around us that we live in every day.
Well, we're going to get back to the pandemic in a little while. And what you just said reminds me of this remarkable book called The Craftsman by Richard Sennett, who's a philosopher who talks about a kind of dialogue between the hand and the tool, between the person using the tool and the tool itself. And that resonated with me a great deal. I want to ask the next, go ahead.
I read that book during the process of creating our purpose, actually.
Oh, wow.
It's great.
All right. I have his next one together on my bookshelf right behind the camera right now. I'm a big reader. I want to ask this question first of Shannon, but then Lana, I want you to weigh in on this from your sort of your wider perspective, which is one of the things we've been talking about in this series is that brands having avowed, publicly stated purpose is not without risk. We are living in an extraordinarily polarized society. Some of the turbulence of seems to have quieted down over the last couple of months, but it's still right there beneath the surface. And Shannon, you've talked about having a pretty diverse customer base, a diverse employee base. So when it comes to the risks of purpose, how does Stanley Black & Decker determine and manage that risk? And then Lana, I'm going to ask you for, from the perspective from your seat as well. So Shannon, let's start with you, please.
I think it's a really complicated time for brands, people, governments right now, really for everyone to navigate through. And what has helped us the most is having purpose as our North Star, being for those who make the world, and really questioning ourselves when these issues come up of if we're really going to be for those who are making the world, what does that mean? And what kind of steps should we be taking to do that? But I think it does present challenges, and organizations really need to think about how they approach it, and being true to the values of the organization is really core. And so when we look at when issues come up and how we're going to act or react and whether we're going to make a statement, we look at it in a few buckets. And it's really about, is this an issue that is important to our customers, our employees, or our communities? Is it a place where we have that it's going to be meaningful impact to that group? And is it something that we have knowledge and expertise in? There are some of these topics that are really challenging, and not everyone has the background, or companies have the background and knowledge and expertise to really be thoughtful and offer an opinion. So if we don't, we really need to get smart fast on whatever the topic is. And then finally, is it something that we're going to be able to take action to help out on? So if it's a topic that we're going to take a position on, we also have to be able to act, because we know that brands are really pressured on making statements, but not necessarily backing those up with actions and words and support. So we know words alone just aren't enough to make a difference. And that's when brands are often getting backlash, when they're not in alignment with their values, or they're not in alignment with taking action on the topic that they've spoken out about.
Our EVP of Member Engagement and Development at IAB, Cheryl Goldstein, who's my boss, she leads our DEI initiatives and talks about there's a difference between activity and progress. And so I think that might be sort of akin to what you're talking about. Lana, what is your reflection? We talked about purpose washing before, but what about the risky side of purpose for your clients and the other companies you observe?
There's huge risks, actually, but I think there's a bigger risk to not being true to your purpose. So I would kind of lead with that. And it's something that I've been looking at really, really closely. And some companies have a purpose that's a little easier to live up to. I think having that very narrow kind of focus on purpose can be really helpful. So for instance, if you're like a brand like Patagonia, I think their purpose is something like build the best product and cause no unnecessary harm. As Richard Kestenbaum, who you had on the show, has pointed out, they've made some business decisions. They've made decisions not actually to have their products out with certain companies that are not great for the environment. They give employees days off. So that has some business impact. I think probably one of the most famous stories that so many of us watched, certainly within the IAB walls, was the Nike case, right? When Colin Kaepernick took a knee. Nike made some really huge choices, and it had a really big impact. And I think, the outcome of it was extremely positive. But I think more than anything, I think Phil Knight did this really great interview with Fast Company, and he said something like, it doesn't matter how many people hate your brand as long as enough of them love it. And I think they knew exactly what they were doing when they made choices and led with the Kaepernick campaign, which I think was brilliant, like creatively and on behalf of the brand. So for those that didn't watch it, the stock took a turn at the beginning, and a lot of people had opinions on purpose-driven brands at that point, but ultimately I think they had 163 million in earned media out of that, 6 billion in a brand value increase, and a 31% boost in sales. So if there's a lot of risk, I would also say there's potentially a lot of reward as well.
And just on the mechanics of marketing, salience is almost always good. Oscar Wilde said, the only worse thing than being talked about is not being talked about. And certainly, whether you were, on the pro or the con side with Nike on that one, they were inescapable, which of course, aids, unaided recall and brand recognition and all of those things. So yeah, Shannon, you look like
Brad,
you,
I would add one more thing because I'd
please.
love to hear from Shannon on this. But when I spoke to Lisa Campbell at Autodesk about this, your brands belong to the stakeholders, and the employees are big ones right now. And so when BLM was happening and various things that we were all paying tremendous attention to and deeply felt, connected to, employees have a lot of opinions too. So the brands are not only responsible to folks outside the company, but deeply with their own employees as well.
Shannon?
Yeah, just to echo what Lana said and the comments on Nike, right? Knowing what your values are and being true to your values and true to understanding, what as an organization you stand for.
So Jeremy Bullmore, the famous British agency executive, once famously said, brands aren't built in marketing departments, they're built in the heads of your customers. And the nice addition to that, the build on that, that's coming out of this conversation is the other stakeholders, that your employees, your stockholders, your investors. So it's always nice when sort of a fundamental cliche or truth about marketing, gets amplified in a productive way. Let's talk about, I'm ever so slightly hesitant to talk about the pandemic because that's all we've been talking about for so long. And it's a cliche at this point that the coronavirus pandemic just accelerated things that were already there. But when it comes to purpose, I think that the greatest public health crisis in over a century acted as a crucible for so many companies. And so, Shannon, to you first, and then Lana, for any reflections that you might have from your side, how did Stanley Black & Decker, you started to talk about this earlier, but how did Stanley Black & Decker pivot into the coronavirus crisis? And again, on the return on purpose side of things, what did you learn?
The pandemic was clearly a test of leadership teams around the globe, and it was an opportunity, ended up being an opportunity for us to really understand and appreciate how important having our purpose was for us and having that grounding. So having done that work leading up to the pandemic, we had a good framework and a good baseline and a good North Star for operating during the pandemic, which was such an incredibly volatile time and continues to be, right, for companies and organizations and people around the globe. And we have employees, we have over 53,000 employees across 60 countries. And so, while things are improving here in the U.S., we do have employees in places like India and Brazil that are in very, just high devastating periods right now. And so our hearts continue to go out. We're still working on it, on everything in the pandemic. So it's not left us yet. But I think what was really helpful during when the pandemic first hit and our business got hit pretty significantly hard right at the get-go. So our sales had dropped 40% in April. We were in the process of making headcount reductions and figuring out how we were going to cut costs and what we were going to do to keep the business up and running during this period. We didn't know what it was going to look like and how long, and it was a really difficult period. And the management team, we regrounded around our purpose, and we set 3 priorities to operate during the pandemic. Number 1 was to ensure the health and safety of our employees and their families. Second, to do everything we could to help our customers stay afloat. So we had to figure out how to keep our business running so we could keep making products for our customers so they could be taken care of. And lastly, to do everything we could to help our communities around the globe mitigate the impact and spread of the virus. And our organization really took this all to heart. We sent all our office workers home that could work home virtually, went home. We worked on our safety protocols in our manufacturing plants around the globe. We have over 100 manufacturing plants all around the globe. We had some great lessons learned from some of our plants in China that got hit early on by the pandemic, that we rolled those protocols out across all our plants across Europe and Asia and South America. We have over 35 plants in the US. Mask wearing, social distancing, plexiglass barriers, temperature checking. A lot of that before it was really mandated or people thought about doing that. So we were ahead of the game on that. so that we could keep our plants up and running, because we couldn't keep our employees safe, we couldn't keep our plants up and running, then our employees couldn't keep working and we'd have to lay them off, right? So we wanted to be able to keep our employees working. That was really important, but keep them safe in doing that. And we were pretty successful at that. Our case rates are generally below the regions and where we're at, and we've been doing a great job. Best as we can to keep all our employees safe. And then that we were able to keep manufacturing products, to keep products in the stores. So remembering that our products are used by essential workers around the globe to build and construct, and products were used to create temporary hospitals and hospital beds, and our security systems were used in that process. And so all of those tools and materials that we make were really important during that period. And then in our communities, we worked really closely with governments and organizations around the globe, particularly in areas where we had manufacturing plants and our workers were there. So in that period, we made a decision to triple we tripled our donations, our philanthropic donations last year, to be able to provide resources, cash donations to food banks, hospitals, donated masks to help the communities where our employees live and work and our customers live and work, to keep thriving during that period, even to the point in places in Mexico where we had plants providing our safety timeout information that we use in our manufacturing plants to the local government, so they could use that and share that with other governments. So really doing everything we could to help keep the communities thriving during that period.
So let's just build a bridge, though, back to the sort of avowed topic of our conversation, which is what you just described so eloquently, is how purpose-driven Stanley Black & Decker has been and continues to be during, again, the worst public health crisis in over a century. What's the return on purpose? How do you evaluate that? What's the metric? Is it that you have happy employees who feel safe? Is there a stock benefit? Is there what does Stanley Black & Decker get out of this? What is the return on purpose, having just demonstrated so beautifully that you have a purpose that you're executing on?
So I don't think we knew exactly what was going to happen when we went down this path and set these priorities. And we did it mostly because we believed it was the right thing to do at the time. But we were fortunate. We were one of the companies that did benefit from some of the trends that occurred during the pandemic, which was people returning to their homes and doing home projects and construction. So while we saw revenues dropped 40%, they went up, and we've had our highest revenue and earnings quarter that we've had. So by doing all of those things that we did, taking care of our employees, keeping our customers up and running, and helping our communities, we were able to navigate through the pandemic and keep our business running, and then working to meet customer demand when that demand accelerated, right? We didn't have to shut down our plants because we took care of our employees. We certainly have had to add staff because of demand. We've never seen tool demand like we've seen, but working to meet that demand and restaff, right? We hadn't laid off all those employees that we might have done if we were only looking at the financial metrics at that time. So the steps we took during the pandemic have allowed us to really navigate this period in a really successful way. As I said, the stock's been performing very well this year, and we've sold more tools at a higher profit than we probably ever would have expected.
What a fantastic answer. I mean, I can't imagine a better answer to that question. Lana, let's give you the last word. Reflect on, please, what Shannon just talked about in terms of sort of the wider portfolio around the coronavirus, and whether or not the purpose has driven people into good actions that are also profitable, or at least are return on purpose actions during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, I've studied it, but I think if we chronicle this in a few years, it's like in wartime. Sometimes you just see the best of humans, the best of companies come out, and the metrics actually don't necessarily support the data that we're getting to grow great businesses. One thing I've thought about a lot And I think you know this, I am so happy I still get to advise the CMO club, but early on we were having some of our reconnects and we were asking CMOs questions like, how are you forecasting now? And they're in a state where they cannot forecast the way that they've been able to forecast. The forecasting became very, very short, yet those companies were making gigantic changes to protect their employees, like Shannon said, to do right by the communities that they lived in. And just intuitively, I mean, it was so wonderful that Shannon said that the tool sales went up, but I can't believe anybody, because so many of us at the beginning thought this was going to last. Italy was telling us it was going to last a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year and a half, and then what we're seeing in India, who could have ever imagined? And we saw people come out right out of the gate. I remember Paul DRC over at Indeed. I think we were setting up for South by Southwest here, and so many of us just kind of went up in smoke. All the plans went out, but they were a global company, so they told their employees pretty quickly in the US that they weren't going to need to come back to the office. They'd already seen what was happening around the world. Autodesk had a similar story to Lisa's, and the employees wanted to do something. So a lot of giving and innovation and switching, they were always building things with digital tools, a little different than Stanley Black & Decker, but they started to apply that to social good causes, and they have the Autodesk Foundation that they've been running. So I think I heard so many examples, and even in our space, IAB members, right, that thought that they might need to furlough, decided to retain employees and make commitments that they weren't sure were going to back out. I think many of them are doing well now. But I won't say it was a trend, but I do think it brought the best out in so many companies. And I think those that are purpose-driven probably had a great advantage.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end our conversation. I cannot thank the two of you enough for this actionable and inspiring chat. So Shannon LaPierre of Stanley Black & Decker, Lana McGilvray of Purpose Worldwide, thank you so much for joining us today on IAB There.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
So, we will be discussing return on purpose in future episodes of IAB There, and it will also be one of our topics at the Brand Disruption Summit, which starts November 8th of this year. It's a virtual event. You can learn more at www.iab.com. IAB There is a production of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. Our show today was produced by Connor Healy, James Linney, Joe Pilla, and Loretta Bay. I'm Brad Behrens, Editor-in-Chief here at the IAB. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.